This is going to be a comparison between the SDR HDR trick that I share with you and the native HDR here on The Last of Us. And I'm recording this video at 4K 60 HDR, and it is graded at 1000 nits. So you can adjust the settings of your display to get the most accurate representation of what my camera is being able to capture. But keep in mind that it is impossible. Okay, there's no way my camera, or basically any camera that I can possibly afford, to record exactly what I see in front of me. So rely on my description, and let me tell you that I am in love with the picture quality I see here in front of me, because I have so much color separation, so many different shades of green. So for example, I have this green here which looks desaturated, which is not something necessarily bad. It is something that is making other greens look more beautiful. So you don't want every single green on the game to look as saturated as possible, because then they all look the same. So what have me in love with this picture is that we have this green here looking desaturated, and then we have a different shade of green over here. Then we have a more saturated green, a more beautiful green over here. Then we go to the darkness, and the colors are even more saturated. So when I look at this plants over here, I am like, wow. Oh my goodness. These plants over here, they are so beautifully saturated. So that's why you don't want to go crazy with the colors and make every single plant on the game look as saturated as possible, because then you are losing that contrast, you're losing that color separation. So I am absolutely loving here the picture quality. Of course, the game has a lot of issues. I did a first impressions, and I'm just giving this game a try one more time, and so far I have 2 crashes already. So yeah, the game is very disappointing. Yeah, very disappointing. I have a 5800 X3D and a 3080 12 gigabytes, and this is just crashing, and the performance is not good enough. I'm getting 79 FPS at 1080p with DLSS performance. That is just not acceptable. But we're gonna be talking about HDR and the picture quality of that HDR, so that doesn't have anything to do with the FPS. And yeah, I'm gonna share with you first the settings I'm using here, and what I'm going to do then is I am going to change to the native HDR immediately. So I will pause the video so you can see the difference immediately, so you can notice the small differences that are between the native HDR and these settings. So let me show you first the settings I am using here, and also I will show you the settings I'm going to use for the native HDR. So I'm using this game genre preset, which is gonna give me the ability to get more sharpness on the game. So I'm using this FPS genre preset, and of course the black and the white stabilizer to the default 10. And I'm using G-Sync here, VRR, so no fine-tune dark areas option for this SDR HDR trick, because we want to affect the entire grayscale. So what I'm doing here is I'm double limiting the black level, and basically the entire grayscale, I'm lowering it. And using tone mapping off. And then we come here to the colors, color depth 50, auto detect, white balance in warm 50. And then we come here, let me show you also the clarity. So I'm using the sharpness in 10. So when you use that FPS game genre preset, the sharpness, it gives you actually a nicer sharpness, okay? It works better. So now we come here to this secret menu, 111, 3, 111. And then we change this master in peak max CLL to 540. And I am opening the game on SDR, but I have HDR on Windows with the SDR HDR slider maxed out. And that slider is doing 498 max CLL. So take a look at this, man. Absolutely amazing. So let me show you now the in-game picture for the HDR calibration, and I'm going to show you the settings I am going to use for the native HDR. So, let me just show you the graphics I'm using, the settings I'm using. If you're curious, you can pause the video and see what I'm using. We have a long list of settings on this game, which is very good. I like to have that many options, but yeah, without crashes. So then we come here to display, brightness, and this is where we're going to turn on the HDR. So let's turn on HDR and let me show you the settings I'm going to be using here for the native HDR. Something is not working right on this menu because I don't see anything, and it is not because of this brightness setting. So I don't know what's going on, but I'm gonna show you the settings I'm going to use for the native HDR. Just tone mapping off. I get that black level setting back to the default, and then I come here and I use 10,000 nits because the game is trying to output 10,000 nits, which is out of reach for the displays we have today. So I don't know why this menu here, it just looks like I don't see anything. Let me go back again. It's not loading for some reason, but yeah, it is working. The HDR is working. Let me go back again. You see that I see for sure the HDR is working because the afterburner numbers, they look different. They look like more orange, like a strong orange. So I know for sure the HDR is working. Let me go back to this menu, see if I can show you the difference with that picture. I wanted to show you that. Okay, so now the picture is coming. So here's what I'm gonna do. This is the native HDR right now. So take a look at this part where the darkness is. And of course the recording is crushing the blacks here on the darkness. But I don't want to change the settings of the recording because I calibrated the recording for the mid-tone. So you can see the colors and everything. So if I increase the visibility near black, then the picture is going to look washed out. But still, even when this is looking crushed on the recording, you will see that when I change it back to the SDR HDR trick, it is gonna look the same. So that's my point. It's going to look exactly the same near black. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pause the video, and then I am going to change to the SDR HDR trick. Okay, so this is the SDR HDR trick. So you can see that change immediately happening. And take a look at the MSI afterburner numbers. You see that they look now like orange instead of kind of reddish. So that's how it looks. So I'm going to do the same now. Let me show you that I have the SDR HDR trick. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make that change on the game immediately so you can see the difference. Let me show you that I have that black level in 41. Okay, so let me get this out of the way. This is the SDR HDR trick, and I'm going to pause the recording and change to the native HDR one more time. There you go. This is the native HDR. So let me know what are the differences that you see. What I can see right now is that the native HDR looks dimmer. Okay, it looks less bright. The colors are popping less. It looks darker. So let me show you again that I have the settings for the native HDR. I know you trust me, but just for you see, brightness 50, tone mapping off. This is the native HDR, and I'm gonna show you the fine-tune dark areas options too, so you see that it is not touch. See, 10,000 nits because the game is trying to output 10,000 nits. Look at the difference, man. The picture looks a lot dimmer, significantly dimmer. You see, fine-tune dark areas at 0. So this is the native HDR. Take a look at this thing. This is garbage. This is not popping whatsoever. It looks significantly darker. For my eyes to be able to see that brightness difference is just not even close. Okay, that sun right there is looking like it's not popping at all. It's not popping whatsoever. Yeah, I do see maybe a different information on the native HDR. I'm going to look at the clouds with the SDR HDR trick and see what the difference is. But the picture just looks significantly darker. So you see that near black is the same. So it's not that I'm crushing blacks with the native HDR in comparison with the SDR HDR trick. Near black is the same, but the picture is just not popping whatsoever. That there's no pop at all here with the native HDR. So let's take a look at the, let's do again. Let's do the change one more time, and I'm going to, let me get a shot here that allows me to see some difference. So I'm going to make the change here. I'm gonna pause the video and I'm going to change to the SDR HDR trick one more time. Okay, so take a look at the difference. It's just huge. It is not close. If you can see the difference on the recording, trust me, in front of me it's just like, wow. Insane. Absolutely insane. The difference just gigantic. Take a look at now at the clouds. So I do have to say that the sun here is barely visible. It might be clipping on the recording because it is significantly brighter. So the clouds are significantly brighter. But with the native HDR, I do have to say that the sun, it is like a small circle, which is not necessarily spectacular or closer to reality. But the native HDR should have more information for bright highlights like the sun. So in this case with the SDR HDR trick, I can barely see the sun, barely. And on the recording, it might be clipping. You might not be able to see it at all. That's just the settings I'm using on the recording. So on these recordings, you have to either adjust for the highlights or adjust for the shadow detail. You cannot get both because the camera doesn't have that dynamic range. And for cameras that do have that dynamic range, you probably have to shoot in log and then just, edit everything in post-production and do a lot of things just to get a good quality. So this is just the camera of the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, which is fantastic. It is absolutely amazing that it can record this with this level of quality. So yeah, let me know your thoughts and opinions. What are the differences that you were able to see on the recording? This is the highest quality recording I can produce. So let me know your thoughts and opinions. If you have any questions, basically the only difference with this SDR HDR trick, before I finish the video, you will see that in some games, this setting, 41 setting, is going to be crushing blacks. In this case, this is the correct setting because you see how it looks the same near black as the native HDR. But for some games, if you see that you're crushing blacks, then the setting is going to be 46 because those games are going to be only one time limited. So to limit one time, you use 46. To limit two times, you use 41. Okay, that's with tone mapping off. If you're going to use dynamic tone mapping for black frame insertion for games that are limited one time, you're going to use 44. Was it 44? Yes, 44. And for games that are double limited with dynamic tone mapping for black frame insertion, you're going to use 38. Those are the values. So there you go. That's like a summary of the SDR HDR tricks. And how do you know if a game is two times limited and you have to use 41, or if the game is one time limited and you have to use 46? You have to use your eyes. I cannot tell you a lot more than that. You have to notice that 46 is still washed out. Like here, this is looking washed out, and with 46, it doesn't look perfect. And when I compared with the native HDR or with the SDR on the game, I noticed the difference. Okay, especially with the native HDR. So I know for sure it's 41. It's not even a doubt. Okay, so let me know your thoughts and opinions, and if you have any questions.